your two.
Reminder. All right, DEI.
Steve Houchin, spell that here. That's Houchin. That's been everything. So,
So Aisha Kirkham, Head of Service Public Protection at South Castilian District Council. Becky Leachman on the Deputy Head of Lincolnshire Probation.
Matt Broughton, Director of Planning and Partnerships at LPFT.
could you introduce yourself for the?
Sorry, Kay Waller. I'm an MSO. I'm here to do the minutes today.
I'm Mark Lyon. I'm a lived experience peer mentor with Lincolnshire Professions.
And I'm Hannah Furnish. I'm the Peer Mental Coordinator for Lincolnshire Probation.
I'm Lucy Gavins. I'm a consultant in public health at Lincolnshire County Council.
Rosa Troop, Community Safety Analyst Trainee, Lincolnshire County Council.
Peter Lawson, Senior Community Safety Analyst, Lincolnshire County Council.
Sorry, can we just pause a minute? Sorry. Sorry, what was?
Peter Lawson.
Sorry, thank you. Yes.
John Challen from the South East Links Council Partnership. Boston, South Holland. They're trying to put any spice in today.
No one's got a short one, I think. Joanne Davison, I'm Chief Executive to the Police and Crime Commissioner. Liz Rogers, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable, responsible for local policing and central operations.
So it's the domestic abuse business manager, also act keepers, centre partnership.
Seaboard, Lincolnshire Partnership Business Manager. Winter, LCC.
Brilliant.
Clement Winter.
Ellie.
Ellie, sorry. Sorry, evening, sorry.
Okay, we've got any apologies listed today?
Andy Gray. Ben Rowlett. David Steele.
Yeah, we've got Dave Stokes.
Joe from the NHS. I'm not sure what his name is.
Joe Hunter, she was joining online. Yeah,
I have joined online.
Thank you. Thank you. We're off the screen.
Vanessa Ward.
Vanessa no longer works for the NHS or the ICB. She's retired.
Tracy Evans. Everybody.
Lovely, thank you very much. So the most important item today is the election of the new chair, the vice chair. So I don't mind standing again for election as chair. I don't know, at the last SLP, we voted Dave Lynch in as the vice chair. I propose that we stay with that if members are happy to do that for another year. It'll be myself and Dave Lynch. Get nods around the room. Anybody want to take it on? I'll not be here in a year, who knows? Okay, that's decision made then. Thank you very much. So I'll continue as chair and Dave will take responsibility as vice chair. So Jade, over to yourself for the presentation of the annual report. Do I need to move? Yeah, I need to.
I'm going to kick off, and although it will be a double act, particularly weekend myself, with my respective roles as business manager and Dave as chair of the project board for the SLP. So we will just provide a summary of the annual report, which will be circulated at some point post this meeting, and obviously we've got the slides which we will attach to any notes after the meeting as well. So to start with, pinching on Martin's words as word of the chair at the start of the report, Because I think that provided a really good summary and highlighted some of the themes that Jade and I will touch on during the course of the presentation. To kick off, really, key to highlight that it has Thank you. Thought that was coming through the laptop. So the transition as we move from what was a core priority group model to much more project-based approach. Our key themes have still been around the principles of prevention and early intervention, and that use of data and insight to make sure that our activity is directed and targeted appropriately. Early days in terms of that new model, very much in the stage of transitioning from strategy to delivery and implementation, but the signs are positive in terms of the early progress that we're noted. And again, we'll touch on some of those through the presentation. But really key is that strong partnership working and it's remained in place during the course of the past year. We are learning, it is continuous improvement, and we're capturing some of that learning to help us continue to evolve and embed that learning as we go into future projects. So looking back over what we said this time last year that we'd be looking to achieve coming into this year, we have successfully exited our previous strategy, our 2022-25 strategy. The core priority groups were successfully closed down, the actions all signed off, and that was taken to strategy board last year. And we have moved into publishing a 2025-28 strategy. And as I've touched on, implementation has commenced and we've made some strong progress in respect of that. The interim serious violence and needs assessment was completed at the end of last calendar year, and that's enabled us to refresh our serious violence reduction strategy 25-28, and that's published in January of this year. The Data and Insight Board has been established. We've held one meeting, really good engagement around the table, so many different things that signed off. And what we have got scheduled in the next couple of meetings where we are taking a workshop style approach, where we can drill down into some of the actions that we identified at the first meeting and put a bit of a plan together about how we're going to get from where we are currently to where we would like to be going forward, to really embed that use of data and insight, because it is key to that targeted delivery and making sure that we are focusing our activity in the right areas and in the right ways. And finally, bullet point there is that we have refreshed the SLP website. So hopefully, as you'll see, it's a much more vibrant, engaging tool now for members to have a look at. And that is something that we've got on our continuing work plan to make sure that it does remain current and fresh content in respect of that. So just to highlight that this is our structure, it's a very busy diagram, so I don't intend to go through it in any detail. It's really just to highlight that we do have a complete line of sight from strategy to delivery. So our strategy board at the top there is responsible for the governance and oversight, statutory duties of the partnership, very much supported by the project board, and then subsequently the delivery groups in translating that into delivery. And again, with the box on the right-hand side, that data and insight, which supports that whole framework. So a diagram that covers our approach, our SLP universal offer, countywide projects, local projects. So I'll touch on the universal offer before Jake moves on to the countywide and local projects. But just to highlight that our universal offer is that blanket approach for all members of the public and the statutory duties. So we've got in there the preventative education, domestic abuse related death reviews, alongside that data analysis and kind of overarching case management approach. So starting with prevent, again, I won't read the slide out to you, but just to highlight that our strategy is around stopping people being drawn into terrorism and supporting terrorism. So we do that by identifying people who may be at risk of radicalisation and working in partnership to change that direction for them. So if we go on to the next slide, that looks at some of our achievements over the past 12 months. So the Home Office have deemed our training strategy as excellent. and I did just draw out, turn to the right page, a couple of facts and figures in respect to that. So our training programme, our face-to-face training programme was delivered to just short of 1,200 individuals last year. And the e-learning was accessed by just short of 2,800, and that's from across a range of partners who access that training course. Our Home Office benchmarking exercise scored us as exceeded, and 6 out of the 7 categories available and met in 1. So really just demonstrate that we are fully compliant with the duty in respect to Prevent, and performing higher than many other areas that are funded areas for Prevent. So really kind of pushing above our weight in respect to that. The areas that benchmarking assessment looks at, to name just a couple, is multi-agency group, training, referral pathways, communications and engagement. The 3rd year running, we've delivered autism workshops, and that's funded by the Preventing Radicalisation Fund. So analysis shows that referrals for people with autism are twice as likely to be referred as people that are, what's the word, neurotypical, something like physiology. So the programme supports parents, carers, professionals to understand the risks and intervention strategies. We have a Prevent steering group, which is again really well attended by a range of partners who are kind of on top of the agenda in terms of understanding any risks, overseeing channel, training offer, and again coordinating across the partnership in respect of Prevent activity. And then I've already mentioned a couple of ways in which we excel in, that we are seen as a front runner in the East Midlands. So the training offer, the benchmarking exercise, but also our channel panel, our venue hire policy, and our collaboration partners. Moving to Stay Safe as the preventative education model. So the Stay Safe partnership has been in existence since 2014. Its aim, as it says on the slide, is to ensure that school-aged children in Lincolnshire receive clear and consistent preventative education messages. 6 core agencies who commit to the delivery programme, and leaders of all of which are represented there. The programme in its entirety does support a number of legal duties and strategies via its programmes. So that includes the Crime Disorder Act, the Serious Violence Duty, Children's Act, the Domestic Abuse Act, and local and national drugs programmes. And demand for those interventions has increased year on year. And again, if we just go on to the next slide, there's some facts and figures. So Stay Safe was delivered in 100% of mainstream schools to just shy of 23,000 students. The specific online safety and health and relationship workshop reached 38,000. The police education team delivered to 41,000. Fire and rescue, again, we've got secondary schools there, just over 12,000. Additional primary school students, so a total of almost 17,000. And the road safety partnership again, that's split between secondary and primary school students, so reaching almost 22,000, and then the Horizon also reaching 25,000. So some really big numbers there in terms of where we've been able to extend our reach in terms of the education and the different offers that are available through that route to provide that. Those messages to young people to help them make informed decisions around some of the choices that they may make throughout their lives. And then domestic abuse related death reviews. So this is looking back at last year again. The table there does do a look back over 25-26 compared to 24-25, and as you kind of figures speak for themselves, really similar to year on year. But just to note that in April 2026, we've got 16 active guards and 7 active county requests, which are all at various stages within the process. Point, I will hand over to Jade.
Thank you, everybody. So, yeah, I'm going to go through kind of our county-wide projects and our focus there, and then I'll move on to some of our local projects and kind of go through our full model. So in terms of our kind of county-wide projects, they're designed to kind of address kind of key themes across the county, priority areas across the county, and they are very much about kind of like the process or practice change, or system change potentially that we might need to focus on, you know, as a SLP. All of these decisions are made through kind of quite robust project management approaches that get presented to the strategic board, through the project board as well, so that we're based on data as well and information, so that we're making sure that everything we're doing is obviously focused and the need that we need to focus on. Exactly. So in terms of our current county-wide projects that have already been signed by the strategic group, we have one that is related to unemployment. In the needs assessment that was undertaken when we did the remodelling of the SLP, one of the key correlations was around crime and disorder and unemployment, and unemployment and domestic abuse. That doesn't mean they're the causation for each other, but there's a clear correlation in particular areas across our county where we saw levels of unemployment as well as levels of domestic abuse, levels of unemployment and levels of crime and disorder. So it's looking at what that project specifically is, kind of trying to find out what that's telling us, what we need to do about it, and how we tackle some of those issues and obviously improve the outcomes in some of those areas across our county. How we're doing that is working very, very closely with a number of partners that are a part of the SLP that are really key to obviously understanding you know, our communities and the different areas of work within Lincolnshire, but also there is some existing new initiatives that are being set up through the DWP, one particularly being called Connect to Work. So what's actually going to happen around that area is there's a project group being set up as we speak, and all the elements around what remit of that project looks like is just being kind of worked through, because it's quite a complicated area of work. But there is an agreement with the Connect to Work kind of initiative that there will be a pilot looking specifically at unemployment related to crime and disorder, and people that have kind of been involved in the criminal justice system and how we can support those cohorts of people across our county. There'll be an extensive evaluation that will be undertaken in that piece of work as well. So what we're hoping to see in kind of a year's time is some really good outcomes for specific individuals, for communities, and we're hoping that that will really demonstrate the work that we can continue to then do within the county. So it's an emerging picture, but that's one of our really key areas of work that we're working on. The other county-wide project is around our case management system. And the case management system is looking at how we can improve information sharing, kind of have a consistent victim-centred approach. We can share kind of standards, you know, under development in terms of that case management, and then have a strong multi-agency commitment to working together to improve how we understand and work with individuals across our county. So it's a really key part of what we do. And the driver behind all of that essentially is that we are obviously wanting to work closer together and be able to share information easily in relation to antisocial behaviour, but extending to other areas of work as well, where that's needed. And then the other kind of element then in terms of our approach is that local project based, so our place-based approach, where we are focusing then in particular areas within our county that are showing some through data, some through qualitative information, some through a bit of both, where we need to really focus and have some specific project delivery in that area and a coordinated approach to how we tackle that. The current projects that we have are within Skegness and Gainsborough. So they are for various reasons, but mainly again through the data that was presented through our needs assessment, has a number of elements within the area that were showing as kind of like higher than other places. So it felt, as a strategic group, we took the decision to focus on those two areas initially. And pilot our new approach really and how we take those forward. So Skegness had high levels of deprivation and seasonal population pressures. There was higher risk of crime, antisocial behaviour and vulnerability, and there were significant links between violence, alcohol-related harm and domestic abuse within those areas. So a project team is very well established now in Skegness, and there are some very specific project areas going forward. focusing on those key areas that were identified in the data. Just something that I know is been quite a breakthrough in terms of Skegness is that we're actually now working with all the holiday parks across that area, and also some of our bigger holiday destinations kind of in the Skegness area to make sure that we're working with them really closely around alcohol-related harm, domestic abuse, violence, anything that we can do also to support them. And that isn't, you know, that's the project board, and that's made up of all the partners that sit around this table. So some really key work is happening in that area that wasn't already. There's been an identified hotspot area that is high crime. And again, we're working with residents and communities how we can support them in that area to tackle that. Similarly, Gainsborough had elevated levels of deprivation, unemployment and serious violence. They had higher than average reoffending in concentrated hotspot locations. And there was a strong relationship between economic disadvantage and community safety risks within the data that was telling us. So once again, there is a bespoke project plan and project approach now happening in that area with a very focused, locally based team that are working through some of the key objectives for that area. And I think we've already, started to see some really strong partnership work that's happening. That I'm not saying partnership work wasn't happening, but it feels much stronger now in those specific areas where people are coming together to coordinate activity to complement each other. So rather than maybe one agency trying to do everything, actually people working together to tackle what they can as a kind of full system. In terms of the local projects, some of the kind of activities that we're undertaking is a deeper dive kind of analysis. So that's happened within Gainsborough, where initially there was a project group set up, and then there was some further data work undertaken to really understand some of the spikes in data we were seeing. And then it's allowed that project group to really focus on some key age ranges, some key cohorts in the area, some key locations. So really important that we understand that. We've been able to develop the development of holistic community engagement plans. So again, how we're working with our community, how do we find out from them what it is that they're experiencing, and what it is that they feel they need for their area. So again, I know these things that other areas do as well, but it's really key information in terms of engaging our communities. There's a framework for locality-based projects being developed. So again, I think we're going to go into that a little bit more in the presentation. But there is a science behind kind of all of this work that we're doing, and then the mapping of local services. What we have found is that particularly in Skegness, there is so much happening focused on particular age ranges, but it's how we actually communicate that and get that out there to people and how we connect people in with those things. So we're really keen not to duplicate preventative early intervention work that's happening in our community, but actually divert people into the right direction into those activities. And if they're not the right fit, why? Why they're missing the mark, and how do we support that? Some of our early successes are strong local stakeholder engagement. So we're actually, really, I'd say, in there in the community, speaking to people at grassroots and hearing what they're saying about their area and what needs to happen. There's increased engagement with businesses, better alignment with community safety messaging. So obviously having a coordinated approach to that community safety messaging across those areas, improved use of data and insight, and then greater alignment of delivery activity into that. What's needed to develop as we kind of go forward into this coming year, or the rest of this year and coming year, is the outcomes for those areas and exactly what that means. So we have got a set of data for each locality-based project that we are measuring throughout the project process. So hopefully what we'll see is things going down, or if we see reports going up, that's things that we're obviously, the messaging is helping around how do you, get support around domestic abuse, how do you support antisocial behaviour, how do you, reach out to get the appropriate support you need. So it will vary depending on the performance indicators that we've got within those projects, but it's just to assure you that there is a set of data that's been agreed through the strategic group as to what will be monitored through that project period to see that impact, to see that improvement. So hopefully, like I say, in a year's time, we'll see some of that coming through, be able to demonstrate some of that real impact that this model will have. So moving on then to serious violence, because as well as our locality kind of based projects that we just talked about, the partnership also then delivers its serious violence duty through a range of kind of targeted projects. These are our priority areas in terms of the strategy. I won't read every single one out, but obviously the projects that we then take forward around serious violence in Lincolnshire are all based on those priorities within the strategy. If we just move on. So the projects that were delivered in 25-26, and this is via the Home Office funding that we received through the PCC's office. There is a number of projects that were delivered. So we had violence against women and girls preventive education delivered to over 10,500 pupils within Lincolnshire. And there's extensive feedback and evaluation of that work as well. Very positive feedback around the impact it had on young people. There was a fire cadets in Gainsborough, so engaged 15 young people through diversionary activities. These are young people that are being kind of we wanted to work with them, we needed to work with them in areas where in the area where of most need. So very kind of focused, targeted project. Lincoln City Safety Wardens, so supported almost 500 individuals across Lincoln City area and prevented need for emergency services in approximately 65% of instances. There's some really key case study work that's come out of that happened with that particular project. And it's really strong evidence-based as well. And then we've got our GPS tagging, so safeguarding benefits highlighted in the evaluation. So again, there was an extensive evaluation done on GPS tagging, and that's been a very successful project for serious violence. So if we move forward to 26-27, these are the projects that are kind of underway that have been again funded by the Home Office funding. There's some continuation of some of the projects from last year in terms of the violence against women and girls preventive education, and also some of the GPS tagging work. But new for this year is Active Gainsborough, which is a diversionary sports programme. The way that was modelled was actually there was a kind of specification that was sent out to some voluntary sector organisations within our community, and they put forward how they could tackle the needs that we kind of presented in that specification. So it's a really hopefully inclusive way of being able to work towards what we need to in Gainsborough. Lincolnshire Fire Safe Spaces. So this is a network of safe spaces, venues and safety champions across the county. This is around violence against women and girls and serious violence. It is about supporting people to know there is a safe space that they can go to. It could be businesses in the day, it could be the nighttime economy, it could be shops, it could be pubs, it could be a number of venues. So there are going to be 2 pilot areas that are going to be piloted in Lincolnshire in the next year. And there is a number of other elements that ties in with, but really excited about kind of taking that one forward. This also then the Code Justice in Motion will be deliver education to young people on knife crime and county lines. So we had a really successful one of those delivered in Sleaford through North East Lincolnshire Council and other partners that put money in for that. And as a result of that, there's other areas that have seen that success and really want to take that forward. So there are 2 other areas that's happening in for this year for 26-27. I think in terms of serious violence, we will be looking at some point kind of later on in the year of how we need to move things forward, because statutory duties have changed quite a lot in terms of the demands on partners and what they're meant to be doing. So we need to obviously revisit that and just make sure that we're looking at what partners' responsibilities are around serious violence. But there will be some workshop-based kind of work at the end of the year to look at that piece of work. So there's a lot that we need to develop as we go forward into the next financial year around serious violence because of the new Home Office requirements. think that's it in terms of serious finance. I'll hand back over
Thank
to you,
you.
Matt.
Moving on to communication paper. Just some highlights on there. So we continue to run a quarterly SIP newsletter. So that is populated by the coordinators. I've content into that. But it's also got support from the likes of Crime Stoppers, Fire Rescue. Recently put some material in about water safety, for example. That is signed up to, it's open for people to sign up to from across the professional network, but also for members as well. And we continue to see the number of recipients of that increase year on year. So that's really positive. I mentioned it earlier, but we've got that refreshed SLP website, and again, we will continue to keep on top of that to make sure the current content is current and up to date. James touched on it in terms of projects, particularly the local projects, but we've got engagement task and finish groups set up, and a community engagement plans set up for each of the projects as well, because it really is key core to the activity that we're delivering in those local areas. But as part of that lessons learned and our kind of evolution into the new model, we have established a definition and principles for community engagement, which the strategy board signed up to at the last meeting. So again, we've got that framework and that baseline for all projects going forward. And we'll hear more about it later on in the session, but we've got community involvement groups, that lived experience to support with our co-production. Still a relatively new area of business for us, so we're looking forward to learning more from our colleagues across the partnership. Finance-wise, again, I won't read all of the slide out, but just to highlight that the SLP does not have a standalone budget. So the Community Safety Service, County Council, hosts the team supporting the SLP and just put budget and impact that. With support from partnerships, which we'll come on to the next slide in a second. But just to highlight from an AGM perspective that all income received was utilised in line with the agreed partnership priorities and what the funding was provided for. So next slide touches on that part of their contribution. So that does cover things like aid to social behaviour coordination, case management system, domestic abuse related deaths, the analytical capacity, and that funding is provided by district councils, police, OPCC, ICB contributions. So got a good range of support in terms of that financial contribution. Just to pick up on the DARS, it is really a complex and significant area, difficult to budget for. It is unpredictable in terms of numbers and therefore budget, and it's also fair to say that the costs occur over a number of years, because we can't just budget in year for them. We have done a piece of work over the last year to profile the expenditure from data permission to data publication, which has helped us with some mapping in terms of that. So going forward, we hopefully will be in a better place to financially plan for DARS going forward, and that is something that we monitor and discuss with the partnership on a regular basis through the strategy board and the finance group. So just looking forward, so hopefully when we sit here this time next year, we'll be able to update on each of those things. So the first ones are really what Jane touched on around our performance framework, strengthening our outcome measurements, and kind of being able to really evidence that impact of our activity for future scrutiny. So that is something that is key to what we're doing. It's something that we're embedding in all of the projects. It's supported with the data and insight boards, so really capturing and making sure we're clear on that evaluation. So setting out from the start what we're trying to achieve so that we can then measure it going forward. We really are incorporating that lived experience, that community feedback, so that projects are meaningful for communities, that we do listen to them and design projects that deliver against that feedback, and again, hopefully makes that more successful. And we are capturing the learning, as I've said a few times. It is early days in terms of the new model. So we are learning as we go, but we are capturing that learning, and we're developing guidance notes, frameworks, models of working, so that we can, again, as new projects come on board, we've got that as our starting point and a framework to be able to hook onto going forward, but very much open to refining our approach through that learning process. And again, we'll hear from Rosie shortly, which around locality-based working approaches, which again has been really essential in the work that we've done so far and supporting that project development. That brings us to the end of the presentation of the annual report.
Lovely, thank you very much. Both Jade and Claire, for a lot of information. Any colleagues, any questions, observations, before we move on?
Ask some projects, exit strategy for them. Is it outcome based or time frame based? Or a mixture of both?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's both. Yeah, no, I think it is both, to be fair. And I think it depends on each project will be different from the beginning as to what the what we want to achieve or what the problems are, I suppose, within those areas of the issues are that we're trying to tackle. So at the moment, I know that Skegness is saying at least kind of 2027, yeah, at least to the end of 2027. Yeah. Just because of the amount of issues that have been identified and obviously need to be tackled in that area. But I suppose if the outcomes start to be seen sooner rather than later, then that we can begin that exit management obviously process. But what we're conscious of is the community is leading on this really, and that's the key bit. And also the town boards, where we have got a town board, they will be a big part of it because we hope that they will continue with a lot of the work that obviously we start in those areas. But yeah, a bit of both. I think Skegness and Gainsborough are kind of pilots, aren't they, to see where we go. So I think it's really key, and we're trying to capture every single bit of learning that we're getting from that as well.
Any questions or observations? So I think it certainly is really important that we make sure that we continue to have the focus on what does that mean for our crime and social behaviour. So the activities that we are doing, how is that impacting not only the reality of the crime and social behaviour, but also that perception of fear of feeling safe, which is that double-ended sword in terms of doing all the best work in the world, but actually people are still feeling unsafe. Or that's where that engagement process is going to be so important. It's actually probably achieve more with assistance of people with lived experience about what is it and why is it that people are feeling scared or unsafe. We do more around engagement than actually the reality of. So we just got to make sure we get that right balance and we get those. We kind of think about both those outcomes, not only the reality of a crime reduction based on demographic growth, based on kind of all of those external factors, but fear of crime, the perception of crime, I think are really, really important for us as a branch.
In Skegness, there's the first community engagement day happening on the 21st of July.
Brilliant.
So
That's next.
yeah,
week.
yeah. And that's been a really key part of the project and where we move with it and how
That's the important thing. We can do all this work. We don't hear it from the communities about feeling safe as a consequence, and something's changed. We haven't actually done what we set out to do. But that's really good news. Very good news. So I'm looking forward to kind of hopefully as we go through the SLP strategic boards, we'll start to feel some of this coming in. Brilliant. Any other comments, observations? No, really, really good work. So, Rosie, we're over to you then for the place-based presentation.
Okay, that's just an overview of the two place-based projects that are currently ongoing. So I'm not going to talk about them sort of in any detail, but rather just give an overview of sort of place-based working, what that is, some sort of key principles on case studies.
Brilliant.
So next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of what we mean by place-based working, there are obviously various definitions out there about what place-based working can look like. So altogether, the following definition. So place-based working is a community-centred, localised approach that focuses on addressing the unique needs, strengths and characteristics of the population within a specific geographical location. Involves working in partnerships, utilise available resources and design new interventions guided by an evidence-based understanding of local needs and opportunities. So hopefully you can see the sort of key three principles that are ticked out of that definition, being partnership, community and evidence-based, sort of being our key principles for place-based working. So this is a product that has gone to both project groups. So this is the definition that they've adopted and sort of the principles that they'll be working in line with in their place-based projects. So there are different approaches that can be used when working in place. I'm just going to give an overview of some of those. So you've got public health approaches that very much have a population focus and start with the needs of the public, of the population, rather than sort of the individuals. Very much preventative approaches and aiming to tackle the causes of the causes, which I'll go into a little bit more detail of in a moment. But you've also got contextual safeguarding, so quite similar to public health approaches, and it's about recognising that harm can occur in multiple environments. So you've got that safeguarding element, so there is that focus on children and vulnerable people. And then we've also got problem-solving policing, so this targets a more specific and well-defined problem, but it's still working to sort of identify those root causes and conditions that are allowing that problem to continue. Next slide. Thank you. So this is a consideration in public health approaches. So many of these approaches mention adverse childhood experiences, and these are things that have been shown to increase the risk of poor social and health outcomes, including involvement in violence, substance abuse, and being known to the criminal justice system. And it was also found that there's a greater risk of experiencing these adverse childhood experiences in areas with sort of high deprivation, and therefore what they describe adverse community environments. So they're often described together as a pair of ACEs. So I think it's quite important to recognise that these things can be experienced obviously separately. So when we're thinking about adverse childhood experiences, we're thinking about the experiences of the people that we're working with, but also thinking about the adverse community environment more in terms of the sort of the place that we're working in as well. But as I said, these things can be experienced together. So this is just an example of the World Health Organization's public health approach to reducing violence. I just wanted to include this here because it sort of sets out their 4 key steps of their approach. So it talks about identifying a problem via that data collection and building up that evidence base that we sort of highlighted, and then identifying risk and protective factors, which could be done by considering that pair of ACEs theory, to then designing and implementing targeted interventions. And then the final step talks about implementing those at a larger scale. And sort of the reason why I wanted to include this is because they talk a lot about the importance of model fidelity and having a model and a key framework that you can adhere to when working sort of in place and with a public health approach. So I think this is really important. Obviously, across Lincolnshire, if we're working in 2 different places, it's not to say that we could pick up a project that's been successful in Skegness and move it to Gainsborough, because obviously, as we've seen, the needs in those 2 areas are obviously very different. But if we've got sort of that key framework and key understanding of what place-based working is, it sort of increases the likelihood of having a successful place-based project. So in terms of public health approaches as well, you've also got different types of interventions. So you've got physical interventions, social interventions, and economic interventions. You've also got different prevention levels. So this is obviously dependent on the scale of the problem that's been identified. So if we're preventing something at primary level, that's before it happens. Secondary is more of an immediate response after early signs of a problem. And then tertiary is when a problem is already established and is causing harm. And you've also want to be considering your targets of the interventions and who it is that you're going to be working with. So in terms of universal, that's more aimed at a general population. Could be slightly more targeted and selecting those that are going to be most at risk. And then you've also got target indicators, which is targeting those who are more involved. So these things can actually be considered together. If you've got sort of a problem that's sitting at the primary prevention level, we're unlikely to know who it is that we want to be working with. So that would probably be more of a universal approach. Whereas secondary, if we've got some early signs of a problem, we can start to identify some risk factors and start to work with those most at risk. And then obviously if we've got a tertiary sort of well-established problem, we're likely to know who it is that's involved, sort of as victims or involved in the crime itself. And we can sort of target our interventions towards those people. And then lastly, just on public health approaches. So some approaches strive for system change rather than introducing new interventions. And I think it's important to recognise that it doesn't always sort of need to be a new intervention. Often there's sort of a system in there that's working and is in place, but could maybe just use a little bit more sort of joining up to make sure that it's working for the population that it's supposed to be working for. So in terms of system change, that means considering all parts of the system rather than looking at them in isolation and identifying the ways in which that system is connected and improving those connections. So there's many ways to sort of do this, and I think it leads into that partnership element. But one thing to sort of note with system change, it doesn't really happen overnight. This is sort of more sort of small, sustainable changes in order for it to be a lasting effect in place. So moving on to contextual safeguarding, as I said, it's very similar to public health approaches and in particular that pair basis theory. So contextual safeguarding is all about identifying that no child should be seen in isolation from the environment around them. So the sort of diagram is just demonstrating some of those environments. You've got a young person, they've got their family, their home life, their peer group, their school and their neighbourhood, and so spanning across all of those. You've got their environment also included there as well. It's all just sort of about recognising that harms can occur in each of these environments and using a multi-agency approach to tackle the harms and working with the young person and their carers to reduce their overall risk across all of those. And then moving on to problem solving policing. So this is using the SARA model. So this sort of looks at identifying a specific problem, undertaking some thorough analysis to understand that problem, to develop a tailored response and then assess the effects of that response. So again, while this does sort of work for more of a specific and well-defined problem, it's still understanding those causes, the root causes of a problem and the conditions that are allowing that problem to continue. So as I said, this sort of does involve identifying a really specific and well-defined problem. And next slide, please. Thank you. If something that can help with that is the problem analysis triangle. So if you're thinking that we want to understand the three components that are needed for a crime to occur, so using an offender, a victim, and a location. These should be considered at both the analysis stage to understand each of these components and what they look like, but also at the response stage to determine where it'd be most effective to target interventions to achieve the desired outcome. So those are just an overview of the different approaches, and then I'm just going to take you through some case studies using those approaches. So first one is healthy place shaping in Vista, which is an example of a public health approach. So they set some objectives. This project in particular was part of a parent project from the NHS called Healthy New Towns. They developed some key priorities via strategic needs assessment, working with expert partners and local stakeholders. And they used that to design interventions that met the needs of Vista and also achieved those parent programme aims, including a mental health website that was designed by students, outdoor gyms in strategic locations, and a Healthy Vista Facebook site. And then they sort of evaluated that. So their Facebook page reached an average of 13,500 people each month, 450 new downloads of Public Health England apps, and a 27% increase in footfall. This is an example of a public health approach where they work with local stakeholders and residents to shape their interventions and ensure that they're meeting the needs of the community in which they were working in. Changing Futures Nottingham, this is more of a system change approach. So they identified objectives to support people facing severe multiple disadvantage to lead fulfilling lives. So they were working with a cohort of individuals that were experiencing mental health challenges, homelessness, substance abuse, domestic abuse, and contact with the criminal justice system. And they effectively found that people that were needing to access sort of multiple services were struggling to navigate the system. So they sort of took a step back and have a look at how they could make the system work for people rather than people having to work to access the system. So they did this by obtaining the lived experience and views from frontline workers to identify barriers to support and improve their understanding of the issue. They managed to improve service accessibility through greater flexibility in the different services, sort of coherent staff training and enhanced inter-service collaboration. And this overall improved health and social outcomes and also delivered financial efficiencies across sectors. And then lastly, North East Lincolnshire Council is an example of a successful place-based problem-solving approach. So this was a piece of work undertaken after a police report identified a geographical location of concern. This was sort of an open abandoned space sort of underneath like an overpass type thing, where there'd been sort of multiple reports of crime and sort of antisocial behaviour in the area. So they engaged with the community to obtain views on the concerns of residents of what was making them feel unsafe in this area, and what was contributing or allowing sort of crime to occur in this area. They designed intervention with the support of local stakeholders, such as improved CCTV, lighting and fencing, as well as removing self-seeding trees and shrubs that really opened that up. And this deterred violent crime and opened a formerly unused public space car park, which drivers now feel confident to use due to the new CCTV. So yeah, that's an example targeting that sort of location side of the problem analysis triangle. So hopefully you can see that all of those case studies follow a pretty clear pattern of identifying problem and setting objectives, and then understanding the problem using that community perception and the available evidence base, to then tackling the problem in partnership with local services and the community before evaluating if those interventions have been effective. So that's quite a loose and broad model, and is quite similar to that World Health Organization public health approach as well. But it's something that we're sort of looking to adopt as and incorporating our key principles of place-based. So I did put together some challenges that were identified in some of those case studies, and also some further reviews of place-based interventions. So it can be quite difficult sometimes to ensure that residents feel ownership of the project. There can be inflexible or service-focused delivery when you've got lots of partners working together from lots of different services. A lack of ownership over outcomes. Interventions could reinforce disadvantage. So, for example, close proximity to physical interventions can lead to better outcomes. It's about strategically placing those where they are most needed. And some interventions that require a high level of agency from individuals can have reduced outcomes. So interventions that require sort of a big change in behaviour from individuals to access those are likely to be less successful. And then also moving the problem. So thinking about that North East Lincolnshire example, they deterred crime in that area, but just making sure you're not moving that to another area, making sure that you are actually tackling the problem. On the other side of that, there were some success factors for place-based working. So close partnership working is really important and really helpful in tackling some of those challenges. Early engagement with local stakeholders helps to ensure that sense of local ownership over the project. Close alignment with partners' existing strategies and local priorities. Strong management and governance, and improving and connecting pre-existing resources. So as I mentioned, you don't always need new interventions, and sort of build and recognise strengths in an area as well, that can sort of help to improve the overall system. Capturing public perception, sort of as Martin was just saying, is really important, and adopting that proportionate universalism. So thinking about where our areas of need are and adapting our interventions based on that. So I've pulled those sort of things into a summary in terms of break it down into two sections in terms of identifying and understanding the problem and then tackling the problem, and thinking about the kinds of things that we want to consider in terms of the community partnership and evidence base at each stage of going through a place-based project. So when we're identifying and understanding the problem in terms of the community, we want to understand the community aspects. So what's already in place in the community, what's working well, what do they have that we can build on? And also, what other partners are there in the area that we're not aware of? Perception, really important, making sure that we do understand what the community want, what they need, and then how we can help them feel safe. And then targeted communication using appropriate channels. So we want to make sure that we are hearing from the right people. And we're sort of advertising anything, we want to make sure that it's reaching the people that we want to reach. And then in terms of partnership, we want to understand the civic assets and how the system is currently working. In terms of evidence-based, we want to understand those causes of the problem, the environmental, community population, those sort of the childhood experiences, risk and protective factors. And we also want to identify a defined population that we want to be working with. And we also want to understand the inequality and deprivation in the place that we're working. And then when we're tackling the problem, again, in terms of community, we want to think about the proximity to the intervention, the sort of agency required for people to access any intervention that is designed. And again, we want to make sure that we're communicating with the right people about any interventions that are available in that area. In terms of partnership, we want to consider whether or not system change is required, or actually there's something missing, or there's an opportunity for a new intervention that can be designed, and the various levers that are available within the partnership to make that happen. And then proportionate universalism, and making sure that you're putting those things in the right area for the right people. And then in terms of evidence-based, we want to make sure we're not reinforcing that disadvantage. We want to be thinking about the intervention type, whether it be physical, social, or economic, and type of prevention, so primary, secondary, or tertiary. So these are just sort of things that we want to consider at each stage. Thank you. They don't necessarily fit into each stage of the process. So these in the boxes are the same things that were just sort of in that table. But I've set them out in a bit more of a fluid way, because, as I say, they're not something that will fit neatly into each stage going through a place-based project, but more so they're things that we want to be considering as we move through a project. And again, not all of these things will be relevant in every place that we work for every problem that we're looking to tackle. But hopefully, just having that more structured approach to place-based working, and making sure that we're sticking to those key principles that we identified right at the very start of community, partnership, and evidence-based, will help to sort of improve the likelihood of success of any place-based projects. Hopefully that all makes sense. Thank you. Very happy for any questions, comments, or feedback.
Thank you, Rosie. Any questions, observations, thoughts from members? Obviously,
Yeah, thanks.
we need probably help consultant in the room.
Yeah, it's surprised if I didn't have a food. No, thanks, Rosie. That was really good. And I always love a presentation that mentions proportionate universalism 3 times. Like, that's a real. And mine was mostly just a reflection, actually. I think that you talked under the public health approaches section about system change and the importance of system change. And I think for us, that's key, because we're not working in a system that's flush with spare cash. So actually, it's going to be those small tweaks to existing practice, how we work together, how we support people to, access services that they might need. And maybe that's things like moving away from signposting towards walking with someone into a service, that kind of thing. So yeah, I suppose I just wanted to reflect on that, really, that system change, that feels like where we're going to get our most impact, and also where it will be more sustainable, because it can carry on irrespective of funding, because those services quite hopefully are already funded. So it's just just a reflection, really.
I think that's some of the early evidence and indications come out of escape project is that actually there's lots going on, but the system wasn't working collectively together to solve the problems. So actually, we just needed to move certain things to make that happen. So it's a very good observation, and that's certainly what we're finding from the initial kind of feedback from the county-based projects, which is great because it kind of reinforces that.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge for that, other than that, is how we actually evaluate because it's not as straightforward as it is. Here's a new intervention. Let's see how many people use it and what outcomes we get from it. So it creates challenges in other places, but hopefully we'll get there.
Thanks, Lucy. Any other observations, comments? Oh, Joe, sorry. We need a bigger yellow hand.
Yeah. Mine's more of a partnership point than specifically on the presentation. I completely agree with Lucy in the point about the systems approach. I think the challenge that we're all going to have to put to ourselves over the next year is, with all the change that's happening in the system, how do we not just all look inwards? PCCs are being abolished, we'll get LGR, NHS England's going. With all of those changes, the risk is that we all just start focusing on our individual changes. We all pull back and start doing our bit rather than thinking of ourselves as a system.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of because every organisation at the moment is going through that. Local government, completing PCC, all going through probation, that they're kind of bit already. We're all going through significant changes over the next 12 to 24 months. Some respects don't know what the landscape's going to look like. So I think it's a really good point. And I think it comes back to the point, yes, because it's so what we internally talk about service delivery, or actually we've got to put the people of Lincolnshire at the heart. So what does a good outcome look like for the people of Lincolnshire in terms of crime and social behaviour, and how do we make sure we don't internally look at just about our structures and our people, we think about the outcomes for the individuals. And that's if we flip it that way around, then we stop looking about what does our structure say, what does our people say, but actually what is the outcomes we're trying to achieve for individuals. Now do that collectively in partnership. So I think you're right, Joe, we have to keep that at the forefront of our mind, make sure that, because naturally you do, don't you? You think change, cuts. Let's look internally about how we can do that. We forget about support people.
Understanding about what's already there is a really important.
It is.
And Owen's always gone into places like Skegness. It's not that there's a lack of provision. Problem is, it's not connected. People don't know it exists or don't know how to access it. Or we've all managed to set up slightly different criteria that means that no one quite fits the criteria to access any of the services.
I think that's that's what's good about realign what the SLP projects do. There's additional money to it. It's all kind of trying to be done with business as usual, whilst we might have some injection of support from the SLP staff and a focus on what we're trying to achieve. There's little new money bringing to it, any at all. So it's really, really important that we utilize the evidence base appropriately and what is already there appropriately. And most importantly, get the community to really take ownership of it with support. It's not there. The money is not there. The extra money, there is money there. The extra money is not there to do some of this stuff. So the better we can do it jointly together, the more efficient we are, and better outcome we get people. Jade?
I just had a couple of things. Just to say, I could really obviously see all that work, Rosie, that you've done reflected in the work that's already happening in Skegness and Gainsborough, and that's just really, it's evident, and I think that's really important as they're using the model, which is tried and tested and evidence-based. That's great. I think we should look to how they've done case studies, and you've been able to find them out there in the world. I think we should be doing something really similar to that at the end of this with Skegness, and Gainsborough, to say this is what we started with, this is what, and go through that actual process. We can really evidence that, which I know we will, but I just think that was just really clear to see. And then something that I've thought for a long time, and Heidi wouldn't pay me for this, but I really think Sleaford should be used as a case study, because for however, a year ago, 2 years ago, Sleaford got a very different place to what it feels now, which is a much more improved place now, but it felt quite scary at a certain point in going through town. And I think there's a lot of things that have happened, designing out crime, diversionary activities, community days. There's been more police presence in terms of tackling issues straight at that time of the moment, not letting it escalate. There's been agreed responses by partners to how we deal with, say, antisocial behaviour, school education prevention. Everyone's been working together, and there's more and more stuff that's happened. But I just feel, as a resident of Sleaford and speaking to the people, the difference. And I think we should be using Sleaford as a case study to try and
completely what's in your box. But I completely agree with you. Dynamics have changed. Yeah. There's been a whole cultural shift as well in Sleaford as well.
Yeah. But it's been exactly this place-based approach. Continued partners working together, coordinating a response that's over 2 years has then made a huge difference. But like you say, yes, there might have been a bit of injection of cash in some of the designing out crime elements and the remodelling of some of the bits, but actually the rest of it is about people working differently together and how we've created that different environment. And I just really feel that there might be other areas that feel the same, but that's my experience of being in Sleaford and having children that, and worrying about what that's going to look like. And actually, it's just hugely improved. It's not perfect, obviously nothing ever is, but it's massively improved.
I think the challenge will be once the kind of focus of that additional additional work has gone into places like Sleaford or Gainsborough, Skegness, it's about how you maintain it and continue it. That's going to be the continuing challenge for groups like this, especially with the structural changes that are going on over the next couple of years. So
It's
while
and see, this is why it's really, really important about communities. It's why it's about people who live there and having some ownership. You go back to the kind of policing principles back to the whole bill that they do, clear out the activity that criminal activities happen, hold that with the community to make that safe, and then you're moving away and allowing the community to take some responsibility, which is why it's so important around that engagement. But I don't disagree, because actually I think, Peter, just looking back at the needs assessment, wasn't Sleaford the only town that had growth post pandemic, wasn't it? Have I got that right? Yeah. Which is why it became a focus of us within the SLP at that time.
So serious violence fight, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, just reflecting on Joe's point as well, I think so there is a phenomenal amount of change in the system. In the last 3 weeks, so 3 weeks ago, I was at the Campus for Future Living in Mablethorpe, and then this morning I've been up at the Ermine Exchange. And there are some organisations, I think, that are maybe not experiencing as much change. We seem to be really well engaged in those kinds of programmes that it might be worth us making sure we're linked into as well. So one would be LPFT, for sure. Both the Campus for Future Living and the Ermine Exchange talked about how valuable it's been having really close connections into like community mental health teams.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about finding those organisations that everyone's going through some change, but maybe a tiny bit not as unstable as the ICB, let's say. And also they were talking a lot about primary care networks, and I just wondered whether or not we have had any conversations with the primary care networks through the work in Skegness and Gainsborough, and if not, maybe it is worth a reach out, because when we're talking about those outcomes and particularly the impact on that kind of fear of crime feeds very much into kind of mental health and wellbeing. So I just wonder whether it's worth trying to make sure, because PCNs, as far as we know, aren't going to change imminently. So again, it's just thinking about those organisations that are perhaps not quite as in a place of upheaval as everyone else, so they're recognising you have a lot going on.
It's also about kind of identifying those hubs of safety, because all the PCN parties have health hubs, care hubs, things where communities should feel safe. So it comes back down to that kind of, and that's all of that is about instilling, reducing the fear of crime.
Just thinking from a sort of health perspective, there is the whole booming change around neighbourhood working to come down the pipeline very quickly.
Yeah.
So there's a parallel universe running here, isn't there, that we need to be mindful of different emphasis and things, but still that partnership point is an important connection, because that's going to have, the language as well, we just need to be mindful of, because we're talking here about place-based in health, a long debate about what that actually means for some time. I think what it actually means is Lincolnshire from a health perspective, but the place here is the neighbourhood, and the rough definition of 30 to 50,000 population keeps coming around. So, but you are right in terms of the PCN, it does feel like the footprints, at least, that can standardise, and from a health perspective, that seems to be the building block for a lot of localised work and things. So it's important that we don't lose those parallel run-ins, because there's lots of crossover and partnerships to be done in the myriad of all that work.
Yeah. Really, I say that's the one of the best simplified problem-solving presentations I've had the pleasure of seeing. It gave me, PTSD looking at the SARA model, but other than that, it was fine. I thought it was very good. It made it simplified. But the chart at the end, it works actually really well about how we construct, not only how we construct solving the problem, but how we then construct the evidence base as well, and then the outcome base of it. So really, really well done. I want to think about how we might want to use that slightly wider, both internally.
It's being shared,
Yeah, we'll share that. It will share the whole slide, but think about how. And again, the offer is there that community safety analysts, say that in we? The analysts within LCC, of which we contribute funds for, are there for us as a partnership to kind of utilise. So if you need some of that narrative coming into your local areas and you want to, show how this is being operated, then please utilise that. Reach out to Peter. Otherwise, I thought that was really, really good. Okay. Did you want anything? Right. So we are absolutely nearly smashed on time. So rather than, we've got now a 6-minute break. Quick leg stretch, refresh, get a drink, toilets. If we are back at 3:50, we are absolutely spot on time. If you look us through to Hannah's bit.
There is no presentation.
No presentation.
I am.
Wonderful, I like that. Improvisation means you can say anything you like and you won't know whether it's right or wrong.
That is very much my life. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us part of your meeting today. So I am the peer mentor coordinator for Lincolnshire Probation. Part of my role is to recruit and train people on probation to become volunteers for the service. So essentially trying to capture talent within our casehold or our client base and bring that internally so we can improve systems, policies, all those sorts of things, which we can then bring that back from looking from a lived experience lens. How can we improve what we offer to our client base? So from that perspective, I've brought along Mark with me. So he's one of our peer mentors for the probation service. He's been doing this for forever, to be honest.
2023 now.
Yeah, long time for us. So naturally, there is a cycle with volunteering in that people come to us for a particular purpose, whether that be to get experience, to go on to careers or something of that nature. We just never really lost you.
I can't like to keep a toe in.
Absolutely. We wheel him out for special events. So here we are. So I'm going to pass across to Mark, but he is an exemplary example of rehabilitation. He's done absolutely everything he should have done and could have done while working with us on probation, and fast passing that. Just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So we're going to talk a little bit around kind of the influences, what led into criminality, what that looks like, and then on the flip side, after being in custody, what was then implemented, how we worked around that, and kind of feed into what you guys are working on. So I appreciate on the levels that you actually work in communities, it sounds like you are implementing and embedding lived experience throughout that. And we are here today to essentially bring it to a more strategic and planning level. So how about it, bud?
So I'm Mark. So I'll start with a little bit about where I started my career. So I was a heroin addict for 30 years. And, heroin was just my drink side to everything. And, I think back now and that, and it's like, it's not like I was a kid and I thought, I want to be an addict. That was not what I thought, maybe truck driver like my dad, something like that, but never where I went. But, for 30 years, I'd had, prescriptions and tried to stop, and nothing ever worked for me. And, with that, at first, I did a full modern apprenticeship. I was a qualified mechanical electrician. But for me, I see addiction as a disease now. That's how I get my recovery from drugs. It's that, and it's progressive, and it gets worse and worse, And I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we say it's progressive, incurable, and fatal, because it's a disease of the mind. And as it progressed, jobs wouldn't maintain it. I'd be stealing from work, and in the end, I did a lot of horrible things. I hurt my family. I lost my children. My daughter, she was put into care when she was 3. She's 16. I've never seen. I am building a relationship with her again, and I've got a fantastic relationship with my eldest son. Also got a little 14-month-old boy. But I didn't know there was a way out, and I just kept committing crime, kept hurting everyone I knew, you know, because I couldn't stop. I didn't honestly, and I never thought I would stop. I'll be honest with you, I thought I would die using, or, you know, at best, I'd be tied to a chemist picking a prescription every day. Quite frankly, it's a book. And eventually, I was sentenced. I got 2.5 years in the January the 24th, 2022. And she says, I don't want to share my knowledge, but I like to be honest with you, you know. In the end, you know, I got convicted for intensive supply class A. Because that's just where it took me. But when I went to prison, because I was sick and tired of it, you know, that, like, I'd not enjoyed doing it for such a long time, but didn't see a way. And I thought when I went to jail, if I can't get clean in here. Yeah. And the first problem I experienced, and this is something I think is wrong, is my scripts carried on in jail, but when I first went in, they wanted to up my dose and leave me on it with no reduction or anything. And I had to fight to make sure that I got reduced. And within a month being in jail, I was clean. I was off the medication, did 9 months in prison, drug free for the first time since I was 13. Nothing in my system. And that showed me that actually I can do that. Everything was very overwhelming, but I used prison very positively, and I was doing education, English, maths, did horticulture, something called Compass for Life, which is about, you know, what I want to be, how I can help people. And just that's where I started there. The best thing that happened to me in jail was I met my probation officer. I'd never been on probation. Somehow I'd never gone to jail and I'd never been on probation. I really don't know how. My probation officer, Jess, she built a relationship with me. She took the time to come in and see me, and we built a really positive relationship. And which was really strange because perception of probation is really poor, really, really poor for people who live that life. And that wasn't my experience. So when I got out, you know, I'd done 9 months drug free. I was going to have to change everything because I only knew one way of life. I only knew the people that I used with. Yeah, you know, the thought of being around other people, you know, the general public, you know, I had terrible social anxiety. I was full of fear, you know, and that tracing back all the way through my addiction. So quite frankly, where it all started was when I was terribly sexually abused at 11, always at school. And that's when my drug taking started through unaddressed trauma. And I see that a lot today. But got out, she referred me to LRP Double Impact. I started going there. I did their peer mentoring. And basically I was signposted in the right direction to the people that could help. And I did that for a while. And then once I managed to get a couple of months clean and stayed out of trouble, I did the peer mentoring with probation, got to school, share my experience with others, things like that. There was a few things I feel that are very wrong. When they offered me TAC, the only address out was my mum's. You know, I'd lost my dad in 2017 and I'm also problem with that is I was going back onto the estate I used on. But the only other option they gave me was they was going to put me in approved premises, which are full of people who use. You know, at least at my mum's, I would be away and isolated all the time. And I actually said to them, if that's what you want to do to me, I'd rather finish my sentence. Because that's just, it's such a vicious cycle when you're released from prison and you're put in places like that, or sorry, we've got nowhere to be just released on the gate and that's it, fend for yourself. Because if you've lived my life and, you know, prisons are full of addicts and addiction and crime falls through it, you know, the shoplifting, the robberies, the burglaries, the thefts, it's, you know, people needing to get the drugs. And, you know, when they're doing that, it's never personal. They might not be, but it's so fear-based because they don't want to be without and don't want to face feelings, the trauma of the past. You know, a lot of them don't address it. I see that a lot in the recovery I do today. It's such a thing. You think these are bad people. A lot of these people are just running from something that happened when they were a child, whether it's being you know, the domestic abuse they've witnessed, you know, sexual abuse, abuse to themselves of some form, bullying. It nearly always traces back to something like that. And it's not addressed today. But I was lucky. I was very lucky, and I got the help I needed because I was signposted to the right places. You know, it's a sad thing because I is a member of NA, not that I represent Narcotics Anonymous, it's strictly non-professional, it's just recovering addicts, helping recovering addicts. There was one NA meeting, and me and a few other people, and there's now 4 NA meetings. There's one on a Tuesday night, which I go to when I leave here. There's one on a Thursday night, there's one on a Saturday night, and there's even a women's only one on a Monday night. And the fellowship, it's grown massively. Recovery is, since I've been out of jail, it's becoming more popular. There's still not enough to point people in the right direction. And you know, it's like LRP are great, but if you have a script, off you go. There needs to be more done, you know, whether it's groups, whether it's therapy of some sort, you know, to address them, to get them to open up and talk for something that, you know, it's very painful. And it was very painful for me to talk to about at first. I'm lucky I've got a great sponsor who taught me, you know what, it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to ask for help. And that's why I think I'm recovery is strong. I'm really passionate about it. I also, you know, it's like I said, some of the things that went well. I had a great probation officer. She made the effort to get to know me, build that relationship, and understand my needs, what I was going to want, and ask me then, you know, how are you, what's wrong, how do you think? Stuff that people had never done, because there's a horrible tag when you're an addict. You know, you're seen as the lowest of the low, and you do some very low things to get what you need. And what you don't realise is a lot of them do that. The guilt, the shame, the regret, the disgrace they do it with. It's overwhelming. And then they don't want to feel that. And that just starts a cycle again. And it is a very horrible circle of feelings and trauma that fuels addiction. And it is, you know, fortunately, that part of it's not addressed. It's not addressed when they go to jail. So you're on script, how will just leaves you on the same dose, you know. I think when you get into prison, you know, you've already had your freedom talk, it should be, yes, you're on a script, we're reducing it. So they get a chance to be clean while they're in jail. Unfortunately, you know, and it's there's a lot of drugs in prison, a lot. And some aren't work, but it will work for a lot more than I think people give credit to, you know. And if they got a better chance of reducing that whole problem of the antisocial behaviour that's all circled around addiction, and you know, the trauma from being a child and being bullied. And when you're bullied, you then think you've got to put on this persona, you know, you're not scared, you're not this, you're doing things you shouldn't do, because that's how you feel, that's how you protect, that's how people protect themselves. They put on masks instead of actually addressing the hurt that's causing that. I really like what you put on your thing, because it said about childhood experiences and trauma. It's not looked at enough at all. And, you know, I see it in a lot of the meetings I attend. People are going back to, you know, like I said, I never grew up and wanted to be an addict, but circumstance and choice and not knowing there was help out. The problem is it then causes, you know, because I've got 2 kids, one's in care, and I'm very grateful for social services. But for a long time, you know, our social services, I hated them because I saw that as a shot at me. Do you know what I mean? Where what have I done? I like kids. Do you know what today I see as they did the best thing possible and got me away. They got away from me because you would have gone for it. I'm accountable today for all what I did. And I tried to make it right, you know, through carrying a message, through doing things like this, through helping out when I can, you know. Got employed, that's another issue, you know, you get convictions, you've got criminal history, and when you're trying to change. And I know there's supposed to be no discrimination and stuff like that, and if that's really what you think, you're missing the ball, because see it, no, there is. I was very lucky, Iceland, it was the first job I applied for. And it was only because I was like, I think I ought to get a bit of experience. I'll apply for a job while I was sat waiting to come through a peer mentor at probation. And I got that job. But when I was in the interview, he goes, have you got any convictions? And I skirted around at that point. And he asked me that. And I was like, you know what? Just be honest. And I honestly thought that would blow my chances. Yes, I've got a conviction. I was an addict for a long time. This is what I do with probation. So peer mentoring down at Double Impact to open for addicts. And my recovery. And they gave me the job. And that was nearly 2 years ago. And I'm now talking shop rep for Iceland in our store. And I train anyone who comes to me, learn to drive for us. I train them. And they were really good to me. There aren't enough employers giving that chance, you know. And then it comes back to the unemployed thing, such a vicious circle. You know, because even when you're on benefits, it's so hard to get a job. If you're underprivileged, you know, you've had the chance to get qualifications. It's just it's such a vicious cycle of events that's causing it. Just once you're in, it's really difficult to get out. There needs to be, you know, more ability to get education, stuff like that. Health, you know, especially people coming out of prison. There's not a lot for them. And like I said before, a lot of it comes down to the fear that they don't know any different. And if there's no one there to show them it can be different, that change is never going to come about. And it is really difficult. And I don't envy people writing the policies, but this is my experience. You know, I was very lucky. I see a lot of people not that lucky. I see people who are trying to get clean in the meetings I do and struggle to get a job, benefits, and they still shoplift because the cost of living so much, and that affects it more. But it is very difficult. But you know, you want to protect the people in the neighbourhoods and that. And I like, you know, you said we can't focus on one crime. Maybe not focus on the crime, but you can certainly put more of the focus on the people and the trauma they've had to start with. That, you know, they might not know, you know, it's going to be really hard for them to admit that. But see it more and more, recovery is becoming a big thing. The more people you get in recovery, crime rate's going to drop because there's going to be less people using drugs, less people binge drink alcohol and stuff like that. It is possible with the right help. It's really difficult because once you're in that cycle of in and out of prison, and you get out, spend a bit of time where you've got health, you put a bit of weight on, you straight back out, you drop straight back into the circle of people you were with before. Nothing's going to change if that's the cycle that keeps happening. And somewhere, there's got to be a break in that, you know, and maybe, you know, getting them clean in jail to show them they can be clean is a good start. Because if the ability to use in jail, I know they do their best to stop it, believe me, they do, but it's still there. And you're not going to change everyone, but you're going to get to some of them. Then you get to some of them and the others see it change. Oh, hang on, he got clean, why can't I? He changed his life, why can't I? I think that needs to be seen for a difference to happen. Yeah, I think that's about it. You know, I feel very blessed today. Like I say, I've built a lot of bridges. I get to help them, get to help other people. I'm very passionate about seeing recovery because it keeps me clean, it keeps me on the right track. Because if I don't do what I do to maintain my recovery, there's a good chance I will be back as a statistic. Don't want that. And the thing, I enjoy what I do. It's very great. Hannah's been brilliant, and so is Jess. The probation service were amazing. All the this, to this, to that. That's the way you think. You don't get shown any difference. And, you know, it's another sad thing. Not all probation officers are great. You know, you might not get one you get on with because, you know, you can't get on with everybody. That's just not a realistic expectation to have. Personalities clash. There is the ability to find somebody to get on with and then build that relationship. The problem is, it's the caseload that probation have. It's massive. And people get lost in the cracks. But yeah, you know, that's how I see the bigger picture of problem. You know, what happens when you're released from jail? The whole cycle of what addiction is and crime that comes with it. A lot of that's coming back to trauma that's never addressed. So yeah, I think that's if if you can get into that, you know, that would be massive. And then obviously the trust comes with people, because when people do get clean and start to give back, they want to look at community projects and stuff like that. It really does benefit, because once they start, a big thing when you get clean is you want to be selfless, you know. You spend so long being selfish and self-centered that it's just part of the things. And I see that a lot, you know, through things I get to do, through community projects, you know, helping out, you know, gardening, helping them, just even helping their neighbours and making amends for some of the things they've done. It's huge. And it helps build the self-worth and the self-esteem back up, which, you know, they've lost it. Because when you have trauma as a child, you lose your self-esteem, you lose your self-confidence, you have no self-worth, you lose your voice. It's so difficult to speak up. I never spoke about mine. I never spoke about being bullied at school. I went looking for a sense of belonging with people who didn't know really who I was. Well, they were doing the wrong thing. And although my mum and dad brought me up, you know, drugs are bad, don't do this, don't do that, the need I had to not isolate and be alienated was immense. So I did things I shouldn't have done. And then it progressed, and then did more and more things I said I'd never do, until, quite frankly, I didn't know how to stop. Just rolled that. So, I mean, how I'm sat here today after you know, trying to take my life numerous times, because I didn't see a way out. Just patient, I started. I've never looked back. Probably, and I never will. Thank you.
So it's never easy coming in and kind of putting your heart out on your sleeve, telling us your life story. But there's lots in there actually that I kind of really like to get into. That's what we're kind of doing, but I'm not going to do that here. But I definitely think we need to not only call upon you and what the probation service are doing around the lived experience work and that peer work, but I think how do we break you and other people like you into some of the work that we're doing? Because I just think there's lots of things actually that we've already got on the cards. I'm thinking actually, where's that true understanding of what the system looks like from the person who's been through the system, and actually, are we right? So I think you've got some significant value to add even further wider than what you're doing now. So we'll kind of reach out through Hannah, or I say me, people that actually are really
Absolutely
do it, because I think there's a real opportunity around some of the stuff, some of the elements we've spoken about, certainly around our place-based work.
I just have a minute to say thank you so much for speaking. So honestly and eloquently to everyone, it was really amazing. And thanks, Ali, for everything that you're doing in that arena. But also just to say, we used our lived experience group to help us with getting the happening up and running for probation as well.
Yeah.
They're absolutely invaluable when it comes to looking at projects and how we can tailor them to make sure that they work for our client group. So yeah, it's well worth tapping into that resource.
I think about the project and you think about, okay, so who within ScapeNet, for example, where we've got that targeted work, what is the current release profile of people coming out of jail into that project area that we're having? How are we working with that group now in a preventative mindset, as Mark's just set out, to enable them, before they've even left, they've got a job. Before they've even left, we know exactly where they're going to live. So that kind of this kind of Derek Order, so you get someone a house, you get someone a friend, you get someone a purpose, like whether that's job, volunteering, self-worth. You're cracking the cycle with all of that. So I think there's lots for us that we could lean into just on that one conversation around how we can think differently, which is the powerful element of hearing people who've gone through what we continue to talk as a system. For you, it's an experience that's held. You're just trying to break out of the cycle. Where would you see people going in? Well, that's not where they come out. When they've gone back in, that's not where again they come out. But I definitely think there's some things that we can do. Anybody else got any, Claire?
I was only going to ask how many, I know there's only one mark. How many marks do you have in terms of numbers of peer mentors?
I currently have 8 who are trained in Lincolnshire, and then there is another 7 coming onto a new cohort, which is Southern County, based in Grantham, but they'll be from Boston and Grantham, kind of surrounding areas. So we've got quite a number, and we've also part of regional teams, so we've got them across Leicester, Nottinghamshire, and then Derbyshire as well. So I'd probably say we're looking across all those areas of around 50 peer mentors who feed into events like this and much other stuff.
I'm even thinking about Connect to Work team that we've just employed. Just listening to you about so they understand the perspective of the people that they're trying to support into work. They've probably never spoken to somebody who's come out of jail and found it really hard to get a job and what that means for them.
That's the pilot we'll be doing.
That's right.
So I'm like looking over. I'm going to be in demand.
You've done in Iceland, you have
Yeah, through Dave, let me know.
I honestly think that we will be setting a pilot around that next the difficulty of getting a job once you've got in the and your example of how you can do that and the honesty and transparency with the employer was obviously what did it as well. And you as a person, but I think we need to learn that and bring that into that project.
I mean, there are a lot more companies today. There is a website. I don't know what it is. About companies that do that's the one. And I know Susan, he was huge in that, and it does a lot to get and he employs people who have got criminal records who are coming out of jail, and he pushes that and about giving second chances and massive difference because it does make a huge difference. And like I said, in their self-worth and confidence, I've got a job, just maybe.
Yeah.
As long as they can, but that's the start. It's changing everything. Got somewhere to live, you've got employment, then you're busy. And then you're not seeing the people you see so much. Then you've only got to make new friends, you make more people at work. So you're just reducing that time spent in that old cycle until eventually it breaks.
The other word moves recovery as well. It's the importance of having the things you need to maintain your recovery, and recovery doesn't stop at a certain point. It's kind of constant.
No, I'll be in. So when I'm in a meeting, I'm more than an addict, and I'll always be an addict. But I'm an addict in recovery because the disease I have, it's always with me. If I don't arrest it, we say arrest it on a daily basis for the other practices. I have readings in the morning. I reach out to other people in recovery, and I do NA meetings whenever I can to keep myself around that because. If I don't and I stop doing that, all right, I might not go out and use tomorrow, but eventually that self-centered thinking that I'm only bothered about me, it leads back to it. And even against my will, we start saying, I'm powerless because I don't know how to stop. And if I do use, that'll be it. I've got. See you later. Pick up once, gone. And I did have one relapse through touching alcohol once. And alcohol was not my problem. I had 2 pints, and with that, it then shifted the way I thought, if I can do that, I can have it pint. And I made that, and that was it, I was gone. And in 5.5 months, I destroyed everything that I built. Just like that, because there's some sort of switch. And even though I know I shouldn't be doing it, I just did not know how to stop. I was really looking for my friends in NA who didn't see me and come and drag me back. And, that was nearly 2.5 years ago, and I've never looked back. And that was through thinking I could have one drink. Abstinence for me is the only way to maintain my recovery and stop me going back to doing everything I did before. And I know if I don't, that's where I will end up, whether I want to do it or not. That's where I will end up because that's what I suffer with. And, disease, it's very much looked at now as addiction is looked at as disease now. It's something that's, the drugs were the solution for my inability to deal with life, my inability to deal with the feelings that went all the way back to trauma as a child, which, can be a project.
Brilliant.
Just to, there's some comments coming on the chat on those that are online, so just to echo thanks for sharing your story. And there's some connections and experiences that we can tap into, so I'll share them post meeting and movement.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or views? LCC are good at employing ex people. I have conversations regularly with people down the refuge sites in Grantham where I live that seen you for a few years. It's always a good. I always have a good chat with them. Always have a good chat with them, sharing mutual stories of life. Yeah, it's good. Okay, so and also you've clearly got well versed of what your timing is like. So we're nearly spot on timing wise. So, Liz,
Thank you.
act.
Thank you, Mark. And it probably dovetails really nicely, actually, into this conversation. And it is just 5 minutes, just in terms of a brief. And I think it's probably definitely relevant for some closer attention at a future meeting. But just in relation to the Sentencing Act 2026, I think I touched on it in the policing update previously, but we're now moving through the next phase, which takes us into the earned progression model of early release from prison. So those that have been given standard determinate sentences for standard offending will be eligible to earn release at 33% of the sentence served, and for more serious offences at 50% of the sentence served. So nationally, that's anticipated to be a release of something in the region of 6,000 prisoners over a 10-month period, on top of business as usual, which is about 900 per week nationally. We will get the first in Lincolnshire, we'll get the first notification mid-July, anytime now, in terms of what our releases are for September. So the releases will start in September. And we anticipate them being fairly small numbers. They will, of course, be released on licence into the supervision and management of probation. But what the earned progression model works on is that actually the period of time that they're under probation supervision will shorten. So we'll have a number of individuals within the community who are remaining on licence but have no monitoring and supervision conditions. Some, of course, will fall under the management of IOM, but a very small number. So we just need to be cited on the fact that we will have releases into the community that, to your point, Mark, will be leaving prison unprepared with a requirement for access to services, for housing, to prevent the cycle of reoffending. We can expect increased demand on services, but equally looking at actually how we fill the gap between integrated offender management and more general offender management, which we will probably look to our neighbourhood policing teams and partners to engage with, so that people get the support with what drives the offending. So I wanted just to mention it here to make sure people were cited. There's lots on the government website if you want to tap into it and dig into it. But Joe and I have had conversations about, there's obviously a place for the local criminal justice board in terms of the CJ partners, but actually I think there's a place for the SLP in terms of actually these individuals that are part of our community. And to Mark's point, that brings the experience to life, doesn't it? I think we all feel we understand the cycle of offending, but actually when you hear it, when you hear it come to life from Mark's perspective, how we can do work and focus as a partnership to a support with the housing needs, employment, and the wider recovery. So I just wanted to put it on the table to make sure people were aware. And think about what people think in terms of whether our existing structures are sufficient through sort of our communities and partnerships meetings that we have across the districts. We obviously have IOM, but whether there's anything in addition that we feel we need as a partnership. Schools.
Check with the housing
groups already?
I don't know what's come out nationally, because obviously it's disseminated. We've got, it comes out nationally through the MPCC to us, and there's a whole gold structure around it. And that's why I bring it to this meeting, because I'm not quite sure what the communication is like across. I mean, I'm expecting Becky, you linked into it, or is that am I making an assumption?
Well, apologies, I didn't catch your question because you were quiet.
Has it been to the housing?
Oh, right. Thank you.
I do the housing providers have an idea of the numbers that are going to be coming through, because I know last time it was very much business as usual. The numbers were manageable, weren't they? So it's just that understanding of the numbers.
Yeah, which we'll have a clearer picture, as I say. Well, we're in mid-July now, but as soon as we get the list, we'll be in a position to understand what that looks like, and we can obviously link in respectively. And I guess that's whether we go through communities and partnerships in the same district, through our local policing teams and through our probation colleagues. No, we don't, it's not like, was it 2024 with the prison population when there was very quick and sort of mass release of prisoners. It's more planned and phased than that. But it's here to stay. So actually, in terms of the prison population versus, the population in the community with licence conditions and criminogenic needs, then it's going to shift slightly.
Suffice to say, it's quite last minute job, I suppose, is what I would say in terms of the guidance that we're getting. It's all quite last minute. So, for example, everything that is due to start 2nd of September, all hands off our new tiering model, which we haven't yet got, isn't finalised and we haven't been given. So until we've got that, the prison calculations can't be properly done to put people into the right tiers. So we're expecting all of that in the next couple of weeks to start kicking in, and we'll get much more guidance. But yeah, the regression model is essentially, it'll be a third in custody, a third on licence, and then back to a third where people are still on licence but unsupervised, which I don't know, for those of you that remember the at-risk period, it's very much like that. We're not calling it the at-risk period, but people won't be managed in that final third. We expect there to be some guidance around some sort of reactive management, quite similar to our reset cases. But yeah, people will spend less time in prison. They'll come out much quicker. All of our intervention work with people will be front loaded into that initial release. There will be a minimum number of contacts, but there will be a maximum number of contacts that we can have with people. So that's very much like a medical model of someone on tier 70, so someone on tier E, you see for 4 contacts, and then that's it, you're done with them. So that it be very much moved into that model. So there'll be a lot of signposting to the other services. There's lots of work going on around freeing up the pre-premises bed spaces in terms of accommodation, and our CAS3 resource that we have available. So there's lots of work going on around the accommodation provision in the background. Yeah, that's kind of the direction we're heading in.
Yeah, I do feel like we just need to separate it, because it's not just that, it's also the whole, it's the general prison population anyway. And actually, is there more we can do? What is it that we are doing? How we can do it?
Yeah. Well, the other part, of course, of the Sentencing Act is the presumption against remand in custody and or custodial sentences. So far more people will receive convictions and then be released on licence on electronic monitoring, for example. And so it's the overall reducing reoffending, dare I say it,
piece about how we work in partnership to, you know, to support people.
Something for the secretariat of the SLP just to think about and kind of think about what we could do collectively, whether, like, say,
It might be
and it might be, like you say, the sort of community groups that you're kind of meeting at a local policing level are suitable, but need something else to come into them to provide them with the right information. Support that. Okay.
I think it'd also be helpful to just have a conversation with the criminal justice board. So the criminal justice board meeting tomorrow, it's co-chaired by the deputy PCC and ACC Mail. And this has been on our radar for some time, but it's that challenge, as you said, that we don't quite know what it means and what it looks like. So we've talked about how do we understand the impact? How do we understand the impact for the public in terms of how they feel about community safety? Because the messaging that will come out undoubtedly from the press is people are just coming out and people aren't going in. But then also how we understand what the different pressure points are that it puts on public services. So you've got more people in the community requiring support. And at the minute it hasn't been assessed as an additional demand. Additional burden was the word I was looking for. So there's been no assessment around additional burden for the community services. For policing's made the case, for example, to say, well, we need additional resourcing. We need additional housing capacity. So what we've been trying to look at through CJB is how do we baseline where we're at now so that when this happens, we can measure the impact and also the impact to the individuals of they're coming out quickly. Have they had all of that opportunity for support, for employment? Are they coming out ready to come out, or is it suddenly a decision? We know before when some of this has happened, people are suddenly told on a Friday that they meet the eligible criteria and they're going to be coming out on a Monday with no preparation. I just think we just need time in the criminal justice board to be clear what that board are going to do and then how it can mesh in with whatever's decided through the community.
I think is Rachel presenting tomorrow on this subject?
She's coming. I think she might have given apologies.
Also, Mark, don't worry about it.
Very okay, any other thoughts on that? So we'll talk about how we join in with the criminal justice board and what we think about it. Anybody got any OB? Much time running over? No, that's brilliant. So genuine thanks to all partners for what I think has been it's a changed year, changed approach, but it's, for me, I think it's the right way to go. Evidence-led interventions, activities, absolutely kind of brings benefits, and we can't do that if it's kind of involved. So thanks very much for again another productive year. Really looking to answer the so what question next year. Did say that at the AGM last year, we're not quite there yet, so I'm hoping this year we can definitely answer the so what element. And I think Mark will be attending every meeting. So thank you all very much. Have a good year. That for you all soon. I've got to take off because I'm now late for the meeting I chaired 10 minutes ago.